Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and today I'm here with Fern Schumer Chapman, author. And today we have a very special episode because we're going to be talking about explaining family estrangement to children. Now, this is especially important for some of our groups because this has been coming up a lot, as a matter of fact. And Fern and I have been, of course, talking about this, and we've been saying we need to do an episode about this. So thank you so much for being here, Fern. It's great to have you.
Oh, it's always good to be here. And this is such a challenge for parents. Um, Families come into estrangement one of two ways. Children may never have the opportunity to meet their estranged relatives, or maybe suddenly there's a disagreement and there's an immediate break in the family. But for any of those reasons, it turns out that 1 in 4 American adults are estranged from a close family member. So the children are often collateral damage. And the reason is that some of the what's behind those estrangements is abuse, neglect, mental health or substance abuse problems, differing expectations of family roles or clashes in personalities, politics, or value systems. And those are things you really can't discuss with young children.
There's so many issues that get brought up, and you're absolutely right. There's so many of those types of issues that get brought up that cause estrangement, right? And how we experience them as adults can sometimes differ in terms of how the kids experience it, right?
Right. And it's just overwhelming and puzzling to children. And one of the big dangers is that children tend to personalize that experience. So they blame themselves and they feel abandoned and they feel unworthy.
Yeah, that's really, really important that we remember how this can potentially affect people, because there's so many ways that this can manifest, right?
Right.
And, some of the ways that this can manifest, for example, is, of course, perhaps not calling or texting or just not even getting in touch with them or sending birthday cards or anything. So, kids are very curious by nature, and I find that they tend to ask a lot of questions, right? And
Right.
they can come up to you and they might say, well, why is a certain family member being treated differently than the others, right? And it's a completely honest question when it comes to that.
Right. They're very sensitive to the wins in the family. So they pick up on things that you wouldn't believe they're listening to. And there's so, which to start with, I think it's important not to speak within their earshot about your estranged relative.
Yeah, we're going to get into what we can do, of course, and that's really
Yeah.
something that, of course, that's very important. I think that also, I think that we need to recognize that this can affect kids in different ways, right? They can have difficulties in concentrating. They can even withdraw as a reaction to all this, right? And there can be like these types of external manifestations, such as anger or sadness, and the danger
Yeah.
is always that it pours into other areas of their lives, right? So
Yeah, and I think too that there is a great fear on the part of children that if one relative has abandoned you, does that mean that a parent will abandon you? Suddenly it opens up the door for very scary possibilities.
absolutely not. And you and I both agree, of course, that personalization is a big one, right? And I think that that's the thing that can happen because, even as adults, we try to shy away from unpleasant conversations. Sometimes, we don't like to have certain things we have to do. We push it away or put it at a later time, right? And that's the thing that can happen with these types of conversations. And what happens, of course, is that this can, of course, affect children in different ways. And what we might see as boundary strengthening, for example, or bewilderment at being pushed away, they could see it somehow as something else, internalize it, and somehow make it about them, as you were saying.
Right. And I think that's the big danger in this, which means that parents have to be mindful of number one, what age their kids are, and number two, how sensitive they are.
Absolutely. I think that that's really, really important, like you say. And I think that, this idea of uh, powerlessness that we can have, is really important to acknowledge as well, right? because what happens, I find, is that we tend to want to make sure that our kids are not in pain. We want to make sure that we're fostering their well-being and such. And the thing with this, of course, is that it can, of course, pour into their lives. And that's the cruel thing with estrangement, is that it tends to do that sometimes. It gets to extend itself into the younger generation. And, it's really important that we don't fall into a pattern of avoidance or to even choose the wrong course of action, right?
Well, and for these children, these are really treasured relationships with grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, maybe even older siblings. And so to lose those crucial relationships is losing a sense of belonging.
I agree. I agree. It's really important to see how they see it themselves, which is sometimes in stark contrast with how we experience it, of course, and that's something that's really important. So let's get to the gold here, Fern. Let's talk about what we can do when it comes to stuff like this. I know that you and I have been really wanting to share some ways in which we can help people with regards to this, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of them is to talk to kids in an age appropriate way. That's really, really important. I think that we tend to take the vileness and awkwardness that we feel with it, and it's we sometimes tend to be dismissive, or not necessarily understanding the idea that it's important to talk neutrally about a family member, right? And that's really, really something that we need to use. And I tend to think that using reference points that the kids can understand without going into too many details is good to be able to do that.
There is no one size fits all solution. And that relates to what I was saying a little bit earlier. Some kids are more sensitive and they have less tolerance for this situation. In general, I would say that kids under the age of 7 simply can't grasp the complexities at play in some of these challenging relationships. So it's probably best not to say too much or to keep it very simple.
I absolutely agree. I think that's important, of course, to talk, with them simply, of course, without rehashing everything, without going through the whole baggage we're all carrying when it comes to stuff like this. Um, but I also think that opening up the door to our own feelings is good, because when we do that, we're giving permission to kids to talk about their feelings, right?
Yeah, I think it is important, and I think it's important to relate to them on their level. So, for example, saying something like this, you know how you and your sister sometimes have arguments and you have a hard time settling them? Well, sometimes my brother and I have fights as well, and we are working through it, and it's taking time.
I love that. I love that because we're normalizing the idea that it's not everybody that gets to get along for a variety of reasons. So I really like that. And that's a great way of actually avoiding bad mouthing our family member or sibling in front of them, right? Because that's so important to be able to recognize. And I keep stressing this because it's so important. The relationship they have is entirely theirs, and it can very much differ from our own. And I always put the caveat that if unless the kids are used as pawns, then it's another story entirely. You don't want to promote alienation towards that family member unless there's a threat to physical and emotional safety, of course, right?
And I think to add to that, I think it's important to have this conversation to be ongoing. So, in other words, as they grow and mature, you might be able to add information for them, but you don't want to just get stuck in that simple explanation. At some point, you're going to have to acknowledge that the child has more of a capacity to understand what's happening, and you want to reinforce their perceptions. You don't want to deny them.
Absolutely. And that's so, so important to be able to do that and talk openly about that. And a good way of talking about our feelings, of course, is to reassure children that they're not being abandoned, like you were saying, right?
Right.
And that's what's really important here, is that they don't conclude that the estrangement is somehow because of them. So coming up with rational reasons, for why somebody may not be talking to them. They're busy, they might be seeing other people right now. There could be many different reasons. So when we broaden that, we tend to not make it about them so much. So what you're doing is you're really reassuring them and telling them, as a matter of fact, that you're going to be there for them as well, because it becomes an opportunity for strengthening that bond that we have with them, and it boosts their self-esteem too. So why not?
Well, I think the biggest fear any child has is that they're going to be abandoned or cut out in some way. And they carry that. So when they see you cut off another relatives, that only exacerbates that feeling. And it's important to be mindful that that's operating within your child.
Yeah, exactly. So that becomes something that we can all do to monitor, of course, and see how their inner world is ticking, of course, you know. So yeah, and I think normally normalizing the fact that friends can be like relatives is really important. You know, highlighting the fact that a child can feel good being in the company of another person from their circle, is especially important to show, and it's okay to love people outside our family who are nice to us and make us feel good, right?
Right. Family isn't necessarily defined by blood.
Exactly. And we've come to learn that ourselves, you and I, of course, and a
Yeah.
number of people in our community as well, when they create meaning for themselves, outside of family. That is very important to be able to do, you know. And one more thing that I like to mention sometimes is this idea that sometimes, a structured contact with an estranged sibling or family member is okay. We might not like it ourselves, but if the kids are still in contact with them, I think it's okay to have like an online phone or play date with that estranged family member for a time limited activity, for example, be it in person or virtually. And I mean, if that contact is valuable and rewarding to the child, then it continue. Again, with the caveat, if it's used to alienate your child, then it's absolutely okay to go or to limit contact if necessary, of course.
Right. You don't want your children to be used as pawns by a narcissist. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. If there's something salvageable in the relationship and you want to do that for your child, that's a good goal. Maybe a limited relationship would work where you see these people at family events, but at least your child can have the opportunity to have a connection with a cousin. So I think you need to really reflect on the entire family, not just your own personal needs.
Exactly. So I think we've given a lot of advice to our community today. So I'm really, really thankful for this episode. We're already approaching the end of our session today. So Fern, let's talk about resources. What would be your number one resource at this time for our viewers?
Well, I think it would help some who are dealing with this issue to process their sibling relationship through my Sibling Estrangement Journal, the Sibling Estrangement Journal, which is a guided exploration of a sibling relationship through writing.
It's a wonderful resource and it's a great inner journey that you can have with that. So I very much like that resource as well for our viewers. My number one resource at this time would probably be the support groups. Of course, people can reach out to me and they can come to me in private practice if they need to speak with the therapist, of course, with regards to sibling estrangement or family estrangement for that matter. And also the support groups are very, very important because they help to break isolation and they can give people a sense of empowerment. So I really, really encourage people to reach out and contact me or Fern, and of course, look into, of course, the support group that we have. This is every couple of Wednesdays, and of course, Fern, you come when you can, of course, because you're very busy. But of course, we always appreciate you being there, and it really helps to have people get together like this and get a mirroring effect with others that are going through the same thing. Dear viewers, as always, please subscribe to our channel. It really does help us to, of course, boost our numbers, get the message out, and it really does help to empower people further in this process and this journey that other people, of course, are walking when it comes to sibling or family estrangement. So by all means, please click that subscribe button. It does help us tremendously. So thank you so much for doing this, Fern. It's always great to have you here, and I'm very much looking forward to our next talk again.
Me too.
All right, you take care.
Bye now.
Bye bye.